Because if we say we believe in democracy, we have to actually walk the walk.
Yeah. So the argument that's being made in some states right now, New York State, for example, is that Republicans have heavily gerrymandered so many states that if those states were no longer gerrymandered, the Democrats would have a significant advantage in the House of Representatives right now. But the Republicans control the House because of gerrymandering in red states. And that blue states, by going to citizens' commissions, as California has done, are basically, handing the elections to the Republicans because they're surrendering on the battlefield. Instead, that blue states should be gerrymandering as aggressively as red states are, because I'm talking solid blue states, not purple states, because they're not going to fall into Republican hands. And this is. I'm guessing this was probably the theory in Ohio when Democrats blew it up. But you're saying... Well,
here's the answer. You're echoing exactly what David Pepper said.
And you're saying that's a lousy argument.
I'll tell you the answer. I gave him my answer to that. I said we had a proof theorem where we got a scientific experiment, Michigan and Ohio. It worked in Michigan. Democrats got the majority. Republicans might win back the House this coming election. But it's fair, and people accept it, and it passed by 58%. Right. We have the hot hand. Now, our plan, not their plan, made it into H.R. 1. It would be made national. And right. Biden fell down, and the establishment Democratic Party is protecting him in not making a filibuster exception to pass H.R. 1 and put the Michigan citizens redistricting on the ballot for the whole country.
Manchin and Sinema.
No, Manchin came along. I was very much involved in that. Manchin came along, and I said to David Pepper, because we were having the whole Sinema meltdown at the time, and Manchin came along. We were one vote short. And I said, Sinema's going to be out. She started as the Green Party. She got bought off. She's out. If they don't campaign for the right solution, and if the establishment Democratic Party allied with the corporate funders are not forced out of the way like they are when you have grassroots movements, you will never get a filibuster exception. You will never get Michigan citizen redistricting, and we will be stuck in this partisan grind all over the country as long as the eye can see.
Yeah, I get it. Okay, Patrick, thank you. Fascinating. Fascinating stuff. It's 47 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. Stay tuned.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's your media support group for We the People. We'll be right back with your calls. Blue and Chewy see me walking home through the window, and it's so cute. They're by the door to greet me every day, and I love to see them, too. I'd do anything to have more moments like this with my dogs. Yeah, I know you feel similarly about your pup. That's why I was so excited to find out about Nature's Blend. It's a premium dog food made by Dr. Marty Goldstein, a veterinarian Forbes magazine called The Miracle Worker. And let me tell you, this dog food is the real deal. Blue and Chewy both have more energy and look more healthy since we started feeding them Nature's Blend. You see, a lot of kibble is similar to ultra-processed junk food. It's closer to that than healthy, wholesome meals that you'd feed your loved ones. Nature's Blend, on the other hand, is full of premium meat that your dog needs. It's freeze-dried raw, and it has zero artificial preservatives, additives, or fillers. Plus, dogs love it. The freeze-drying has a way of making the flavor and texture extra delicious. For a limited time, save 54% off your first order, plus receive a free pack of premium dog treats. Just go to drmartypets.com/Tom or text Tom to 511-511. Text THOM to 511-511. Message and data rates may apply. Hi, Thom Hartmann here. My Hidden History series includes 10 timely and paramount books that break down some of the biggest issues of today. The first is The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment, where I look at the real history of guns in America, had to do with slave patrols, and what we can do to limit both their lethal impact and the power of the NRA. The next is The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, where I lay out how Ronald Reagan and Richard Nixon both committed treason to become president just to put right-wingers on the Supreme Court and how the Supreme Court paid them back. The third is The Hidden History of the War on Voting, who stole your vote and how to get it back, where we look at how Hillary Clinton actually won the last election and common sense things that people can do to reclaim their rights to vote. Coming this fall is The Hidden History of Monopolies, how big business destroyed the American dream, And next spring, you'll see The Hidden History of Oligarchy, The Rise of the Hard Right. That's the Hidden History series by yours truly, Tom Hartman, available wherever fine books are sold. Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes in depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of women and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalists' modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solutions, how we get out there and get active. Pre-order now at any fine bookstore. I'm also on the road with a book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series. On Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle. Sunday, February 23rd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis. On Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland. And Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at TomHartman.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. Order your copy now, The Hidden History of the War on Voting.
In the foreword to Tom Hartman's book, The Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight, The Fate of the World and What We Can Do Before It's Too Late, renowned author Joseph Chilton Pierce writes,
To discover brilliant, innovative, creative, and original thinking is one of life's rare privileges. To discover that such a thinker has focused on the most critical of all issues facing our species is encouraging. Because The Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight is a seminal work offering a viewpoint original yet ancient, I see our situation today in a new light. And because of the scope and depth of this work, I find it inspiring as well as disturbing. I rather exhausted superlative in praise of Tom Hartman's book, The Prophet's Way, which I rightly called the most important book I've ever read. But now I find the sequel calling for equal praise, since the issue here addresses the whole of our species, and indeed all species.
The Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight, The Fate of the World and What We Can Do Before It's Too Late by Tom Hartman, in bookstores everywhere.
Help support progressive radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, or one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting progressive talk radio, and tag you're it. I admit it, I don't always make the best food choices, and that's where Field of Greens helps me stay healthy. The CDC says we should all be eating 6 cups of fruit and veggies a day. 6 cups of fruit and veggies? That's an enormous amount of food. I'm guessing very few people do that. I take Field of Greens, and I'll tell you why. Unlike other fruit and vegetable supplements, each specific fruit and vegetable in Field of Greens was medically selected to support.
Now, the top of the hour on the Progressive Voices channel on TuneIn presents the Green News Report.
Nobody is acclimated to 115, 118 degrees.
The deadly toll of extreme heat rises in Arizona.
Juneau now under a state of emergency. 2 structures have collapsed into the river so far, with more at risk, including a condo building, as officials call the riverbank highly unstable.
Glacial outburst flooding a growing danger in Alaska. Plus,
Slovenia's prime minister says this is the worst natural disaster in the nation's history.
Extreme rains and deadly floods strike Central Europe, pummeling Slovenia.
All of that pummeling and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
You know you're living in a hot place when you have to keep oven mitts in your glove compartment.
Yeah, probably not in the glove compartment because you can't touch the metal tab.
Welcome to Phoenix. This is your Green News Report. All right, Desi Doyen, big news, I think good news, in Arizona around the Grand Canyon.
Yes, as we go to air, President Biden is set to designate a new federal monument protecting the lands around the Grand Canyon in Arizona from new uranium mining that threatens aquifers and water supplies. In other news, a state of emergency in Alaska's state capital of Juneau hit by record flooding caused by a massive release of water from a lake dammed by a melting glacier. The glacial outburst flood so far has swept away buildings and forced evacuations along the Mendenhall River, Alaska is warming more than twice as fast as the rest of the U.S. Glacial outbursts in this area only began in 2011, and this year's flood hit a new record. A recent study found a rising risk of glacial outburst floods for 15 million people around the globe, more than half of them in India, Pakistan, Peru, and China.
And now Alaska.
The cost of climate change is hitting hard in Slovenia, where they're just beginning to assess the human and economic costs from days of relentless, intense storms that hit Central Europe and triggered record flooding. Officials say it's the small nation's worst ever natural disaster, with floodwaters inundating 2/3 of the country, killing at least 6, with preliminary estimates of more than $500 million in property and infrastructure damage.
When was their best ever natural disaster?
Good point. In South Korea, more than 40,000 Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts are being evacuated from the coastal campsite of the organization's World Jamboree to get them out of the path of a looming typhoon. However, the international conference was already on the verge of being canceled after the most intense heat wave in decades sent nearly 1,500 teenagers to hospitals for heat-related illnesses. In the Midwest U.S., the record heat and high humidity of July, the hottest month in recorded history, has killed hundreds of cattle across Iowa, Kansas, and Nebraska. State officials said the unusual spate of cattle mortality demonstrated the toll of sudden onset extreme heat on farm animals and food production. In the U.S. West, officials say an unusual desert wildfire in California's Mojave National Preserve that exploded in size over the last few weeks is now mostly contained. However, the massive blaze incinerated countless numbers of the preserve's famous slow-growing Joshua trees, which are not adapted to fire. Experts say they are unlikely to regrow, forever altering the state's fragile high desert ecosystem.
On the other hand, we've had a surprisingly easy wildfire season so far this year?
Yes, overall, the U.S. wildfire season in the West has been quieter than usual this year, thanks to a series of winter storms. But Canada's record wildfires continue to rage amid extreme heat and dryness, and have now burned twice as much land and produced twice the carbon emissions of any previous year on record.
That's not good.
Finally, prolonged extreme heat in the southwestern U.S. has killed nearly 150 people in just 5 counties in Arizona, Nevada, and Texas, according to medical examiners. But experts say the actual toll may be much higher. Extreme heat kills more people in the U.S. than all other types of disasters combined. Rebecca Benner of the Nature Conservancy on CBS News warned that the costs of human-caused climate change are already here and rising, but accelerating climate action can reduce its impacts.
It is no longer a future threat. We are living this now. So whether your basement just flooded, whether you just had to evacuate for a fire, whether it's too hot for you to go outside and enjoy yourself, that means we are now experiencing some of the impacts of climate change. We have to reduce emissions, and we have to do it immediately and faster.
She sounds not so happy about that. Can't understand why. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Don't forget, you can download our reports anytime via Pandora, TuneIn, Apple, Google, or Amazon Podcasts. Find, follow, and share us planet-wide on the Facebooks, Mastodons, and site formerly known as Twitter at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Please help Progressive Voices support the Green News Report by stopping by bradblog.com/donate.
Mary had a little man. The fault. We believe that all men are created equal.
To the magnificent mosaic that is America.
From radio beacon to radio beacon.
I have a dream today.
Change has come to America.
Believe me.
Help is on the way.
Knock, knock. Who's there?
It's a figment of your imagination.
Randi Rhodes Show. Turn up your mind.
Overnight, an outbreak of violent storms on the East Coast. unleashing destructive winds, torrential downpours, and damaging hail.
Aaron?
In Westminster, Maryland, dozens of people, including children, were stuck in their cars after nearly 30 power poles came crashing down. Everyone was safely rescued.
I've never seen anything like this before.
Oh my God.
In my entire life.
The stormy conditions continuing up and down the East Coast, bringing dangerous winds and reports of tornadoes. And roads flooding as drivers struggle to get home. In the Washington, D.C. suburbs, wind gusts up to 80 miles per hour at the height of rush hour, slamming trees into homes and onto power lines. Ahead of the bad weather, federal workers in the nation's capital urged to leave work early Monday.
This is the most ominous shot of the day.
The same storm system hammering parts of East Tennessee and South Carolina.
There's going to be a tree on the garage there advising a child been trapped in the garage.
Where officials say a falling tree killed a 15-year-old. While in Alabama, lightning struck and killed a 28-year-old man. As the wild weather closed in, thousands of flight delays on the East Coast. Then some travelers had to find another way home.
At this point, we are going to try to rent a car and just drive.
Very smart, really. Everybody okay? Everybody, are you okay? The weather, remember when the weather was just, the weather report was just about whether or not you should bring an umbrella? Do you remember that? So now it's like survival, it's like a survival footage. This is unbelievable. So a 28-year-old, instead of playing lotto, got hit by lightning. It's one or the other. Chances. We're in Florida. This is the lightning capital of the world. The idea that you go out in a lightning storm is really repulsive to us. First of all, half of us don't have any insurance anymore, and the other half knows Ron DeSantis is still the governor. So we don't go out in lightning storms anymore because we know no help will come for us. It just won't happen. Anyway, this is unbelievable. I saw this, these amazing forecasts, these amazing reports about climate change all across this country almost every single day this summer, almost every single day. And still you have people calling me up going, I don't know about all this green energy stuff. I'm just not clear. I'm not sure about whether or not I'm for or against. Just don't know. Want a beer. It doesn't matter, honestly. It's $1 trillion, multi-trillion-dollar marketplace. Either you want to be part of that multi-trillion-dollar marketplace or you don't. Okay? Those are your choices. The rest of the world is looking at this and not turning it into some culture warrior street sign, okay? The rest of the world is looking at this going, oh, crap, we need to get off of fossil fuels. Let's innovate our way out of this mess. Oh, and by the way, some of the most heinous governments are completely supported and funded by fossil fuels. Won't it be great when we can make what they have worthless? Won't that be fun? And so everybody's jumping into this renewable. We almost have enough offshore wind to meet the goal that we set for ourselves that we had to meet, I don't know, I guess 2035 or some such crap. Good article today in one of the main newspapers. It's in my homework about, how many gigawatts are actually being produced. I mean, it is happening. It is good. It is a new marketplace. It's something people can actually toil in, get paid for toiling in, service those, wind turbines. That's going to be it is already a job, and it's a good job. Making the bearings for the wind turbines, making the blades for the giant wind turbines. These are all things that people do. And wouldn't it be nice if we did them here? Well, that's the idea behind Joe Biden. And by the way, everybody, we have got to start pumping up Joe Biden's accomplishments because we are about to go down that really, really negative, bad, nothing in it for you, pal, Donald Trump is on trial road. And once you get on that Donald Trump is on trial road, there is absolutely everything else is crowded out. There is no room for any discussion on anything that might actually put money in your pocket, that might actually expand democracy, that might actually create a better culture to raise kids, that might actually create a better little blue marble, a safer, cleaner environment. There's not going to be any room to talk about any of that at all. The whole country, as you know, has ADD anyway. And so once you change a subject, they forget. Listen, last night, okay, here's a perfect example. This is the man I love. Okay, this is him. Love him. Make no mistake about it. Love him. Love you, Howard. Freak. Okay, sitting in the bed, telling me, a story about Kamala Harris came on or something like this, and he's like, let me see where she's polling at. Let me see where she's polling, which is not normal, okay, but it's my house. What would you really expect that we talk about before, shutting our little eyeball? Sex? We're together 15 years, okay? That just isn't, it's not a thing. So he's talking about, I'm going to find Kamala's polling numbers. Let me see. And then he goes quiet for like a while, and then another while, and then I'm like, is he sleeping? I look over, and he goes, there it is. Sweet potatoes in an air fryer. What? You see what I mean?
So you're saying Howard's a freak in the sheets because he's
got ADD by algorithm or some such crap.
Bed.
Yeah. Yeah, in bed, right. Here it is. Air fryer sweet potatoes. Here it is. So I play along. Do you put oil in it or you don't? No, you preheat. That's the secret. Oh, okay. Night. Love you. Swear to God. So once the subject gets changed, we are programmed now to be a nation of scrollers, a nation of reels, a nation of ADD, a nation of the short attention span theater. And once it goes all, like right now, I just looked up, okay? I just looked up. And, I have to have, breaking news on all the time, right? Just in case, somebody announces he's gone to jail. Yay! Or conversely, if you're on the other side of things, he's entered a plea deal because he ain't getting out of this unscathed. I'm sorry, the man actually tried to subvert democracy. Didn't talk about subverting democracy. Wasn't it? By the way, nobody's ever heard. And I asked around. Nobody's ever heard of an aspirational defense. It just isn't a thing, okay? That's not real. And this Lauro guy, everybody is, and by everybody I mean lawyers, mostly TV lawyers, but, constitutional lawyers, scholars, Harvard lawyers. Oh, the Harvard lawyer Ogletree, he died yesterday. I loved that guy. I thought he was, first of all, I thought he was handsome. And second, he died really early. He was only 70 years old. He died of Alzheimer's, which, again, just freaks me out. Okay, so now I have to go from room to room spelling words backwards to make sure I don't have it. And every time there's an ad for something, to keep your brain trained, I have to download it now. I try and do it inside of a game so that it counts for like a free turn or something like that, or an extra man. Yeah. But yeah, it's so, Ogletree was a constitutional scholar, taught at Harvard. He was, an amazing, who his big client was in his life? Anita Hill. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was on the other side of the Clarence Thomas question. He was on the side of, he did it. And he passed away yesterday, and we didn't give a shout out to his family and say, I hope he rests in peace and finds peace now. And how they say in my religion, may your memory be a blessing. So there's that. But okay, so I just looked up, and they're talking about the former lieutenant governor has been subpoenaed to go before the Georgia grand jury. And before that story, they had another story about, they're talking about Jeff Duncan in Fulton County and Fonnie Willis. Before that, they were talking about the D.C. grand jury. Now we're having to, talk about there might be, this is crazy. There might be a New Jersey secret grand jury. Oh, did I say that? Well, that makes me, John Lauro, that makes me bad. That makes me, a criminal. Seriously, because this is what, gag orders and the Eileen Loose Cannon, she's about to go. She's about to go. Don't count on her.
Clear for takeoff. Randi Rhodes. RandiRhodes.com.
The Bob Cesca Show.
Bob Cesca. Two of Donald Trump's political allies in Michigan have been charged with felonies in connection with the alleged voting machine tampering.
I thought that was here in Georgia. So I guess that case is proceeding too. But there's another instance where they went into a polling place here in Georgia.
Oh, yeah. And I think Rudy is somehow connected to that, isn't he?
Yeah. That was one of him and Sidney Powell's things.
Exactly. All right, so this is a separate case. So this is more Republican election fraud. Right? Jesus, these people.
I asked my ninth grade English teacher, a wonderful, very Southern, very gay man. He's very Jewish. Because I was like, what is chutzpah? And he was like,
chutzpah,
David,
right?
He said, chutzpah is murdering your parents and then asking the judge for leniency because you're an orphan.
An orphan. Yep, that is chutzpah.
And that's just this whole thing with Trump. It's like, you can't this is election interference. You're persecuting me because I'm running for president. It's like, no, you ran for president ahead of the U.S. Marshals knocking down your door and arresting you.
His election, his campaign is getting in the way of indictments.
That's what I think. Again, it's amazing. I wrote a whole piece for The Banter this week, just laying out all the awful things from Donald Trump. What more people need to do in the mainstream press, including cable news, is to emphasize that the reason Donald Trump is using that defense is because he intentionally ran for president again or started his campaign again because he knew that he was in legal jeopardy.
This charges were about to drop.
Yeah, this is entirely about manufacturing an insurance policy for himself.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to run, and I may not win, but if I do, I'm going to be able to wiggle out of at least these federal charges.
Bob Cesca.
It's the Bob Cesca Show. New episodes every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, everywhere you get your podcasts, and at bobcescashow.com.
How about a little bit of good news for a change? Specifically, good news about news. The demise of local newspapers has been a very depressing story in the last few years, with several thousand of them gobbled up by Wall Street profiteers. Those money powers loot the publication's assets, then callously shut down each community's paper or reduces them to empty news shells. So that's that. Local print journalism is passé, right? Wrong. High-spirited, community-minded subscribers in places like Glen Rose, Texas, Hamburg, Iowa, Portland, Maine, and International Falls, Minnesota, are humming an upbeat tune of regeneration that could be titled, Not Dead Yet. In Maine, for example, 5 of the state's 6 daily papers and 17 weeklies were sinking under the ownership of an investment group. But all were recently bought by the National Trust for Local News, a nonprofit started 2 years ago. The trust is turning each publication over to local nonprofit owners and helping them find ways to become sustainable. Another new effort called Cherry Road Media has bought 77 rural papers in 17 states, most from the predatory Gannett conglomerate that wanted to dump them. Cherry Road's business plan is simple, old-time genius. Return editorial decision-making to local people and journalists who know the town. Be an active presence and participant in community affairs. Make the locals responsible for sustaining their town's paper and, most important, reinvest profits in real local journalism that advances democracy. This is Jim Hightower saying, in both of these new initiatives, the foremost mission is to serve the common good of the communities, not to pad the wealth of a few distant financiers. To learn more about these models and how you might implement something similar in your town, contact Institute for Rural Journalism, ruraljournalism.org.
Don't give up. Don't give up. What's true?
All things Randi at RandiRhodes.com.
Go for launch.
Speaking truth to power, the Randi Rhodes Show.
Ohio.
A simple yes or no answer could decide how the state constitution can be amended in the future. And it's called Issue 1. It's even gained the attention of Reverend Tim Aarons, senior minister of First Congregational Church.
So what it is a power grab by those who are in the legislature to try to hold power forever.
If passed, Issue 1 would require 60% of votes to pass an amendment to the state constitution. And anyone trying to add an amendment on the ballot would need signatures from 5% of voters in all 88 counties. Just last week, in one of their last efforts, dozens of faith leaders spoke out against Issue 1, saying it's an attempt to silence voters.
To vote yes will be detrimental to people who are not white and middle class. Anyone else is left behind by a yes vote.
One of the main reasons why some people say this is so important because of how it could impact abortion rights on the ballot this fall. Something Elizabeth Marbach with Ohio Right to Life says has drawn a lot of attention.
the abortion issue really is going to be a motivating factor for us to get out to the polls.
She believes the state's constitution deserves protection.
As our state's founding document, as our state's most sacred document that was created to protect our liberties and freedoms. Therefore, it should have broad consensus when fundamentally changing that.
But where the two find common ground is urging you to get out and vote, because a lot could change with the simple answer of yes or no.
Yeah. Or no. Yeah. Or not. Why are the Republicans always after your rights? Why do they always want to take away your freedoms? Why do they, and then they scream about freedom. They love freedom. Everything is freedom, freedom, freedom. The basis of freedom is freedom. I mean, they make these cliche arguments about, freedom is this and freedom is that. But, there's benefits to slavery. There were. And, there's also benefits to not voting. There's benefits to, raising the threshold to amend your own state constitution from what it's been for 100 years. I think it's served you well, Ohio. So today is the day that they're asking you, do you want to raise the threshold to amend your constitution or not? 700,000 Ohioans have already voted, and I think they like being able to vote. I think they do. I don't, and it's so weird that whenever you have Republicans in a majority, this is a supermajority in Ohio, which is what they're trying to protect. Why do I say that? Because it's not just strictly about, putting the right to choose on the ballot for the people of Ohio to choose for themselves in November by voting no today on raising the threshold to put that on the ballot from 50% to 60%. You say, no, I like it the way it's been, leave it alone. That's a no vote. But obviously, it's not just about what is going to be on the ballot with regard to reproductive freedom. Yes, they call it that because it is freedom to have choices. And the other thing that needs to go on the ballot that nobody even wants to tell you about is that Ohio and other places where there's gerrymandered super majorities, like Alabama is another one that comes screaming to mind. The courts, the Supreme Court told Alabama, the United States Supreme Court told Alabama they needed to create a second district of African American majority voters. And they're just flipping off the United States Supreme Court, Alabama. They're going, we're not doing it. We're just not. Make me. Like children, okay? Like children standing and blocking the schoolhouse door. Okay, this is like typical George Wallace garbage. Doesn't survive, but it adds to the delay of everybody having their vote counted properly and in the right ratio. Okay. Well, Ohio did the same damn thing. Ohio has a gerrymandered map, and that's how you have a supermajority in the state house in Ohio, because the census, the actual breakdown of people in Ohio, it's almost equal. It's almost 50% Republican, 50% Democratic. But it's slightly more Republican than it is Democratic. It's like 52, 54 to 47, 46, something like that. But you have a supermajority in the legislature because those districts were gerrymandered. So the next thing you have to put on the ballot in Ohio and Alabama and Georgia and other places where there's supermajorities for no apparent, mathematical reason. Math isn't a thing in some of these places. One man, one vote. Oh, man, how we laugh. But the next thing you have to put on your ballot is going to be creating a citizens commission or a citizens committee or an independent commission or an independent committee to draw your damn maps. I mean, well, this is what they don't want to see added to a ballot in a general election. This is the thing that they are running this against. They only use abortion because it's polarizing. They only use abortion because people have very strong, definite opinions about the culture war. But they're not very clear on gerrymandering, what it is, how it happens, who's drawing the maps. We don't know. We don't care. It's not sexy, but there's something very, very, just emotional, something that is very rage generating, which gets people to vote about women and their right to autonomy in their own damn body. Okay. So that is what's going on in Ohio with this, ballot measure. And today is a no vote, just in case you weren't clear, because they did make it confusing, and they made it confusing on purpose.
Look, it's confusing, right? I mean, we've got to vote no in August before we vote yes in November to protect our reproductive rights. And there is no question that Ohioans do not support giving ourselves less of a voice. We would like to continue to have access to citizen-led ballot initiatives as we have for 112 years, but just ahead of us passing reproductive rights, because Republicans know that we're going to do that too. All the polls show, like you said, about 2/3 of voters really support protecting our reproductive rights. 85% of independent women support this reproductive rights initiative. So they know that they will lose if it can pass under the current rules, which would just require a simple majority rules. One person, one vote. So they're trying to change the rules. And I think that they know that they have something to worry about because those polls are very bad for them and turnout is very bad for them. They were expecting to have a quiet election in August where no one would notice. And instead, 700,000 people in Ohio have voted already. That is hundreds of thousands more than we saw who had voted early in the election that they held last year in August.
Which
and
was
it's
a
actually
midterm.
150,000 more votes even than we saw in the May primary, which was a big deal last year in Ohio. It was the U.S. Senate primary, and it was a very competitive race. And we're even seeing more voting on that in August on an issue, on a ballot initiative issue. So I think that that is leading to some desperation on their side.
Yeah, because I don't think people, line up and, wrap around the building to deny themselves the right to vote. Although I could be wrong. I mean, this country is, back crazy right now. Right? It's just nuts. But honestly, just keep on doing it. Early voting went really well in Ohio, but today is the last day. Today is Election Day. I can't believe today is Election Day. It's freaking August 8th. It's August 8th. Loretta would have been 93 yesterday. Yeah, but why? Because they really wanted it to go unnoticed. They wanted a nice, quiet thing where no one would even pay attention. No one would. And you know what? You start taking away enough rights, people are like, oh no, we're showing up for that.
Clear for takeoff. Randi Rhodes. RandiRhodes.com.
This is Stephanie Miller, and here's what you missed.
Stephanie!
Happy Indictment Week again.
Oh, you know what? I never knew the word arraignment could be so erotic.
Arousing!
I just cannot see his grumpy Gus of a face walking into one more courtroom and getting stared down by Jack Smith. Oh, it's fantastic.
Oh, it's giving indictment. It's indictment all day long, and it is luscious. It is beautiful. It is breathtaking.
It really is.
And can I just say, first of all, we got his code about DC. It's very silent dog whistle. Still dirty, disgusting. Lots of black people. You could tell he was like, I mean, everybody's like, oh God, I hope he gets an all black jury. Oh my God, Fonnie Willis is coming on Monday. It's a black lady judge.
That's right.
Oh, and the closure, I just found out the road closure for Monday in Fulton County, it's to Martin Luther King Boulevard. He's going to get arrested
You're welcome,
next.
America.
You're welcome. That's where justice is going to take place.
Yeah, exactly.
Did you hear her? They've been playing on MSNBC. They've been playing that clip of her being like, when a crime happens in Fulton County, it's my job to investigate, and I will be bringing charges.
That's my job. What's my job?
It's my job.
That's my job.
That's my job.
And I love she's calling out all these threats, and it's like, you morons. What, you think calling her the N-word is going to make her less likely to prosecute your orange Jesus?
You've got to come with something else.
Hear all this and more on the next Stephanie Miller Show.
Every woman knows the terror of sexual abuse and assault. Too many of us know the pain firsthand. Some attack us mentally. Some go beyond that. For too many, it's physical, even fatal. There's no excuse for sexual assault and abuse. Unless
say it with as
you're
much
Republican
respect as I can,
Donald Trump.
but she is not my type.
Supporting Donald Trump sends a message to every abuser,
You can do anything. Whatever you want.
every rapist,
Grab him by the pussy.
and every man who's ever used his power to hurt a woman. Because if he can do it, why shouldn't they?
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1902. That was the day more than 100 trade union delegates representing thousands of working people in St. Paul, Minnesota, elected Charles James to be the president of the city's Trades and Labor Assembly. Virtually forgotten by history, James is considered to be the first African American elected to a city labor council anywhere in America. He was born in 1866 in St. Paul and began working as a leather cutter for local shoe manufacturers at age 15. This was at a time when most African Americans were excluded from skilled trades. His biographer Dave Riley asserts that it is unclear when James became involved in union politics and organizing. Shoemaking was the largest mass production industry in St. Paul, employing thousands. Riley notes that the Knights of Labor had been active in the city during the 1880s, and shoe work.
Call in, connect. To speak to Randy, call 561-270-3844. 561-270-3844.
All right. We're going there. Forget everything else.
A new deadline this morning for federal prosecutors and former President Donald Trump's defense team. D.C. federal judge Tanya Chutkan is giving both sides until 3 p.m. Eastern today to propose dates and times for a pretrial hearing regarding special counsel Jack Smith's protective order filing. That court order following Judge Chutkan's Monday deadline for Trump's attorney's response to Smith's request calling for a court-imposed limits to what Trump can share about the 2020 election interference case. Trump's lawyers firing back, saying he should not be subject to a blanket gag order seeking to narrow the scope of sensitive materials. Smith responding, saying the order was reasonable and charging that Trump's team is proposing an order that is designed to allow Trump to try his case in the media rather than in the courtroom.
Yeah.
In the initial request, Smith arguing that if, for example, Trump were to share grand jury information, it could have a harmful chilling effect on witnesses or adversely affect the fair administration of justice. Smith also citing Trump's recent all-caps social media post saying, "If you go after me, I'm coming after you."
Oy.
Trump's campaign defending that post as political speech. Trump, who pleaded not guilty to charges in Smith's election interference probe last week, accusing the Biden administration of weaponizing the Justice Department against him.
They want to interfere in my campaign. They want to interfere in the elections.
The White House refusing to comment on Trump's indictment and recent allegations. And after receiving scheduling proposals from Trump's lawyers and prosecutors, the judge is planning to hold that protective motion hearing by this Friday. Trump will not have to attend.
All right, so this is where we are in the. Okay, we have so many cases. It's juggling. Okay, everybody, it's not easy. This is, all jokes aside about ADD and not being able to focus and concentrate. There are so many judges. There are so many cases. There are so many states. There are so many actions. There's civil. There's criminal, and so we're just going to confine ourselves to the criminal. I'll just say that in the civil arena, Donald Trump's case, he had a countersuit against E. Jean. It failed miserably. They threw it out, okay? Where he was, saying that she was harassing him. I just, wow, really? All right, so let's confine ourselves to what is criminal court cases in regarding the last, oh my God, the last president of the United States, regarding the last president of the United States. Oh my God. All right. So you have indictments in two states. Well, D.C. isn't a state, okay, but we have two courts, two main cases. D.C., where January 6th occurred, where the community was put through this violence, where the community served to protect the Capitol by virtue of being Capitol police officers, or by virtue of being Metro police officers, or by virtue of, being people that lived and worked and walked those streets in Washington, D.C. to get to work that day or to send their kids to school that day. That's why the January 6th case is in Washington, D.C., okay? We all know this, right? The other case is in Florida, because the Florida documents case with Judge Aileen Loose Cannon, a Trump appointee, is happening in Florida, because in Florida, that is where Donald Trump spirited those documents away to. That's where he hid them. That's where he lied about them. That's where he said he didn't have them. Then he said if he did have them, it was because they were planted. Remember the whole planting experience? We went through that. Then he said, no, I do have them. They're mine, and I'm protected under the Presidential Records Act. The Presidential Records Act says exactly the opposite of what Donald Trump wishes it said. It says that presidential records do not belong to Donald Trump. They belong to me. They belong to you. They belong to the United States government, and they are the caretakers. They are the overseers. They are the people that guard and protect, and if warranted, display them in museums. So that case is in Florida. But part of that case, with regard to the documents, may very well be in New Jersey. Why? Because remember, it was in New Jersey at Bedminster where Donald Trump was sitting with a couple of staffers, one the head of his PAC, his super PAC, Ms. Wiles, and then like two writers who were, trying to get some background information on Mark Meadows so that they could write Mark Meadows' book for him, ghostwriters. None of these people had security clearances. And yet Donald Trump showed them war plans for Iran, battle plans that the United States crafts in order to have contingency plans in case we ever need them. He is showing them to these people who have no security clearances and saying to them that this makes his case, that Mark Milley somehow wanted to invade Iran. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. That's a tangent. But what Aileen Cannon has now shown to the people who argue in her court is that she is questioning the existence of another grand jury, and whether or not questioning the fact that they do exist or can exist, but questioning whether or not her court can consider any evidence gathered in another state. Well, the answer is yes. Okay, that is just not hard. Of course you can. Interstate commerce being what it is, and federal law being what it is, and this being a DOJ case, which is federal, and all these courts that we're talking about now being federal courts, yes, they can share information with each other. Yes, they can. That is not a question. And yet she raised it. She raised it in Jack Smith went to her, and in two sealed motions he filed, he was asking her to please address a conflict of interest with a witness's attorney. Okay, let me make this, in English. Walt Nauta. You know Walt Nauta, right? Walt Nauta, the body man for Donald Trump. Walt Nauta, the guy who moved the boxes. Walt Nauta, who follows Donald Trump wherever he goes now and, didn't have a lawyer and couldn't be indicted in Florida because he didn't want to get a lawyer because, it would be a good way to delay. And Donald Trump was like all about it. Don't get a... Okay, so that Walt Nauta obviously now has entered his not guilty plea and, blah, blah, blah. Well, Walt Nauta is being represented by an attorney. Yay. That attorney is also representing people who we don't know their names, who might testify against Walt Nauta. How in the hell does that work? It doesn't. That is a obvious layman can see it from all the way over here, conflict of interest. You can't have an attorney representing witnesses against one client and then have that one client as a client too. You can't do that. That's like real mafiosa stuff. That's like real, Goodfellas stuff. Oh, yeah, they popped your cherry, and he represents Jimmy the Gent, and he represents Paulie, and now he also represents, Henry. well, that would be okay if Henry was just on trial alone, popping his cherry, which he was. But if Paulie was also accused in that crime, then and Paulie was going to testify against Henry and throw him under a bus, well, you can't have the same lawyer. You understand that? So that was the question in front of her, and the answer had nothing to do with it.
Clear for takeoff. Randi Rhodes. Randi Rhodes. Randi Rhodes. RandiRhodes.com.
For 248 years, the United States Marine Corps has valiantly defended this country against foreign enemies. The Marine Corps' legendary courage, determination, and skill on the battlefield leaves our enemies in fear and our allies in awe. Marines of every race, creed, and color have sworn a sacred oath to protect our Constitution. They fought, bled, and died for this country. Today, the Marine Corps faces a domestic enemy, a small man with a big mouth, determined to destroy the Corps for his petty political agenda. Tommy Tuberville is creating a national security nightmare. Who wins from Tuberville's attack on the Marine Corps? China, ISIS, Vladimir Putin. Tommy Tuberville insults every Marine who ever served, and he puts the men and women of the Marine Corps on the line in danger. Every U.S. Marine is a patriot. Tommy Tuberville is a traitor. The American flag today flies over a nation divided. A nation where hatred and violence makes a mockery of the sacrifices of generations. A nation where one party storms the Capitol in a violent attempt to overthrow a free and fair election. A nation where one party claims ownership of the flag and the very idea of patriotism. It's time to fight back, to take back the flag from those who dishonor it. The symbols of our republic, this bold experiment that has struggled and bled to bend the arc of history, don't belong to the Republican Party. They don't belong to Donald Trump or Fox News or violent terrorists. The flag belongs to every American. It's not their flag. It's not his flag. It's our flag.
Tucker's gone. Rupert isn't. And Fox is still poison for your brand.
White, purple-haired, uglified women.
You're gross. How did you know they were illegal?
You can tell.
Peddling lies, conspiracies, hatred, and violence.
Justice or they'll burn it down. Well, at least they have rhythm.
Now you're going for the kill shot. That guy's a That thrill just went down my leg. Boom! He is dead!
If your brand advertises on Fox, you're paying for it.
No labels designated Donald Trump as a problem solver in 2016. You stand by that?
He solved some problems, and he didn't solve others, just like every other politician in Washington, D.C.
For the first time ever, a president has been impeached twice.
January 6th, it was the largest crowd I've ever spoken to, and they were there proud. They were there with love in their heart. That was an unbelievable, and it was a beautiful day. But you also had people that were very fine people on both sides.
A 9-member jury found that Donald Trump did sexually abuse her.
Federal indictments, plural.
A grand jury here in New York City has just handed up an indictment against former President Donald Trump, making him the first former president in U.S. history to face criminal charges.
Including the unlawful retention of defense information, which is an Espionage Act charge.
Glad to have a MAGA-packed Supreme Court? Proud that they lied under oath to get the job? If so, thank a MAGA Republican. If you enjoy seeing our rights disappear one by one, thank a MAGA Republican today. The Lincoln Project is responsible for the content of this advertising.
Whether you're listening to Leslie Marshall each Tuesday through Friday or Brad Bannon each Monday, you can hear them from 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern on the Progressive Voices Network. Here's a sample of what you'll hear.
Scott Paul in the House. He's president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing.
You know, first of all, I do want to say that I don't believe a military conflict with China is desirable or inevitable. I think we ought to do everything we possibly can to avoid that. At the same time, I think we need to be realistic about what the intentions of the Chinese government are, particularly with respect to some strategic competition.
Don't give up. Don't give up. What's true?
This is the Randi Rhodes Show. To speak with Randi, dial 561-270-3844. That's 561-270-3844.
Okay, just so I could set this up nicely for you so you can really listen to what Ty Cobb, who used to represent Donald Trump, has to say when he weighs in with his big legal brain on this scenario that's going on here in Florida with Judge Eileen Loose Cannon, who has been overturned brutally before by the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals because she actually rules on things that the defendant isn't even asking her to rule on. She invents defenses for you that your defense attorney hasn't even placed before her. This is interesting that she's acting in aid of the defense and answering questions that have not been asked of her and offering opinions on various things that haven't even been presented to her by the prosecution or the defense. That is what the situation is here, okay? So what happened here was Jack Smith put under seal, meaning secretly, asked her a question. And the question he asked her under seal was, can we have a Garcia hearing? All right, what the hell is a Garcia hearing? Well, it has to do with exactly what I was telling you, that when you have an attorney, okay, it's a legal proceeding that ensures that a defendant who's represented by an attorney who also represents others in the same case isn't conflicted, okay? And that's what a Garcia hearing is for. It is, it's a proceeding. And it ensures that the defendant understands that his lawyer or her lawyer represents other defendants or other witnesses in the same case. And that those witnesses may testify against you. And your lawyer represents those witnesses. That would be bad. So that's what Jack Smith asked her for, a Garcia hearing, this proceeding. So Walt Nada would understand what his rights were before they went one step further in that courtroom with this lawyer representing Walter Nada and representing witnesses who are likely to testify against Walter Nada. Just saying. His name's not Walter, it's Waltine. Rhymes with saltine. Salty. Okay. Well, that is what was asked of Judge Cannon to rule on, to actually schedule. Actually, he was asking for this proceeding. And she was just really supposed to schedule it. Well, instead, she starts asking Jack Smith about another grand jury proceeding. Another grand jury proceeding. And some people in the legal world were speculating in their, TV appearances, in their Substacks. Some were just being asked outright, is it a conflict for her to weigh in on whether there's another grand jury in another state, meaning the D.C. grand jury, can it weigh in on the Atlanta grand jury? Okay. The D.C. grand jury, can information that was produced by virtue of the D.C. grand jury's work be used in the Florida case? The answer is yes. But why is she bringing this up as something to litigate, for Donald Trump's lawyer? Something for him to grab onto, Mr. Lauro. I mean, it's so bizarre. It's so weird. It's so strange, right? And then other people were saying, oh, it doesn't have anything to do with the D.C. grand jury sharing information, the January 6th grand jury sharing information with the Florida documents grand jury. And it doesn't have anything to do with the Atlanta grand jury, the Atlanta grand jury being, the RICO Act, obviously, trying to overthrow the results of the election in Georgia through extortion, through lying to the legislature, Rudy Giuliani, et cetera, et cetera. There's no conflict that if they would share what they found in Atlanta with the January 6th grand jury in D.C. It's not a problem. It's not a thing. It's not an issue. But some started to speculate, maybe she was trying to expose, for Donald Trump's lawyer's benefit, that she knows that there's another secret grand jury and that this one might be in New Jersey. And why New Jersey? Because New Jersey is where the dissemination portion of this case would maybe be litigated. It could also be litigated in Florida because, if the majority of the crime occurred in the state, then you can bring it in that state, even if pieces of it, like drug dealing cases, this happens all the time, where the main cartel might be, in Florida, but the drugs were sold in, West Virginia or Kentucky, right? Whatever. But you look to see where the majority of the crime, but there could be, and Jack Smith might have, a secret grand jury in New Jersey, heretofore unknown to us, that is operating, and she's trying to get Donald Trump's attorneys to understand that. She's trying to telegraph to them that's going on, That would be such a recusable offense. That would be a mandatory get out of here. Like you have to be removed from this case. You cannot serve on this case. You are not impartial. The idea that she's been helping the defense make arguments that they didn't ask her to make, and that she's responding and saying, but, there's this here that you can, actually ask. This is Ty Cobb, who represented Donald Trump, and he was asked about this. And this is what he had to say.
I do want to ask you about the Mar-a-Lago case as well, because the judge there, the Trump-appointed Eileen Cannon, issued an order today, Ty, asking federal prosecutors to explain the use of a Washington grand jury. And she's asking for this, even though a grand jury in South Florida, of course, saw evidence and indicted based on the evidence that they saw. So as far as we understand, the defense in this case is not asking for this explanation, but
No.
the judge is. Do you understand why? Is this a normal thing?
No, it's not. This is a highly unusual request for most judges, although it's typical of the conduct that the 11th Circuit came down hard on her previously for insinuating defenses and ideas that even Trump hadn't raised. In his defense, when she bungled the search warrant and the special master issue, and they finally forced her to dismiss the case. I think I think this is a jump the shark moment. I mean, the reality is, no, the defense attorneys are capable. Nobody asked her to raise this issue. It suggests the possibility of misconduct by the Justice Department where there's absolutely no basis for it. The law is you cannot use an existing grand jury to investigate existing charges, previously brought charges. But there's no reason that a grand jury in D.C. can't share information with a jury in Florida. In fact, it's specifically authorized under Rule 6E 3C of the Federal Rules of Criminal Procedure. And it was the Florida grand jury, after receiving and reviewing that information, that issued the indictment. So there's no hint of impropriety, and no sophisticated prosecutor would commit the one area of misconduct that is prohibited in the grand jury in terms of continuing to investigate an existing charge. That's not really what's at issue here. Her concern is, can a grand jury in D.C. actually investigate additional corruption that may have occurred in her district? And the law is clear that they can.
They can. Yes, they can. What he just said was that a D.C. grand jury can't investigate a Florida grand jury. Okay, a grand jury can't investigate another grand jury. But they can share information about, the same person that they're investigating. D.C. is investigating the same person as Florida is investigating. They can share information. But, the way that question was phrased also might be a little tiny bit misleading as to what she was trying to tell the defense attorney for Donald Trump. She may have been trying to signal to, because the question to her was, is Walton Nauda's attorney conflicted? Because Walton Nauda's attorney also represents 3 witnesses for the government who might testify against Walton Nauda. And that was the question she was asked under seal. Could she have a Garcia proceeding to decide and let Walt Nauta know he has rights and his right does not, is inclusive of not having to share a lawyer with the government's witnesses, right? And instead of answering that question about, oh yeah, I'll schedule a Garcia hearing, she answers a different question. And this is what her practice has been. She inserts an opinion on something that wasn't even asked of her. And the opinion she inserts that wasn't even asked of her was whether or not you can share information from grand jury to grand jury. Now, she's a federal court judge. She should know the answer to that, except she has no experience, and that's why Trump picked her. Okay? But people are saying, we're not really sure that she was asking that question, because that's really obvious that, of course, they can share. We think she was trying to tell Trump's lawyers that there might be another secretive, confidential grand jury in New Jersey. In New Jersey. And if she was doing that, she has to be removed from this particular case. I'll tell you, Harry Littman, who was a former U.S. attorney, Bloomberg, Zoe Tillman, Andrew Weissman, who worked with Mueller on the Mueller investigation, and Joyce Vance, who, was a prosecutor for the state of Alabama. They all agree that that's what she was doing. And they all agree that she's either begging for somebody to take her off, and maybe this is her cry for help. Please, please, I can't do this. I can't do this. Or she needs to be adjudicated out of there.
Clear for takeoff. Randi Rhodes. Randi Rhodes. Randi Rhodes. RandiRhodes.com.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1902. That was the day more than 100 trade union delegates representing thousands of working people in St. Paul, Minnesota, elected Charles James to be the president of the city's Trades and Labor Assembly. Virtually forgotten by history, James is considered to be the first African American elected to a city labor council anywhere in America. He was born in 1866 in St. Paul and began working as a leather cutter for local shoe manufacturers at age 15. This was at a time when most African Americans were excluded from skilled trades. His biographer Dave Riley asserts that it is unclear when James became involved in union politics and organizing. Shoemaking was the largest mass production industry in St. Paul, employing thousands. Riley notes that the Knights of Labor had been active in the city during the 1880s, and shoe workers were among the first to organize. By 1899, James had become the first president of a newly formed shoe workers union in Minneapolis, and helped to found 3 more locals in St. Paul. By 1902, James was well known and well respected throughout the Twin Cities as a strong union leader. He served 3 terms as president of the Trades Assembly and then as secretary for 7 more years. Riley states that James continued as a full-time organizer and district business agent, traveling to cities across the Midwest to organize shoe workers. When he died in 1923, the Boot and Shoe Workers Union eulogized him in their national journal. Though James had been obscured from local labor history for decades, Riley and others have worked to write Charles James back into the history books. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Now, the top of the hour on the Progressive Voices channel on TuneIn presents the Green News Report.
Nobody is acclimated to 115, 118 degrees.
The deadly toll of extreme heat rises in Arizona.
Juneau now under a state of emergency. 2 structures have collapsed into the river so far, with more at risk, including a condo building, as officials call the riverbank highly unstable.
Glacial outburst flooding a growing danger in Alaska. Plus,
Slovenia's prime minister says this is the worst natural disaster in the nation's history.
Extreme rains and deadly floods strike Central Europe, pummeling Slovenia.
All of that pummeling and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
You know you're living in a hot place when you have to keep oven mitts in your glove compartment.
Yeah, probably not in the glove compartment because you can't touch the metal tab.
Welcome to Phoenix. This is your Green News Report. All right, Desi Doyen, big news, I think good news, in Arizona around the Grand Canyon.
Yes, as we go to air, President Biden is set to designate a new federal monument protecting the lands around the Grand Canyon in Arizona from new uranium mining that threatens aquifers and water supplies. In other news, a state of emergency in Alaska's state capital of Juneau hit by record flooding caused by a massive release of water from a lake dammed by a melting glacier. The glacial outburst flood so far has swept away buildings and forced evacuations along the Mendenhall River. Alaska is warming more than twice as fast as the rest of the U.S. Glacial outbursts in this area only began in 2011, and this year's flood hit a new record. A recent study found a rising risk of glacial outburst floods for 15 million people around the globe, more than half of them in India, Pakistan, Peru, and China.
And now Alaska.
The cost of climate change is hitting hard in Slovenia, where they're just beginning to assess the human and economic costs from days of relentless, intense storms that hit Central Europe and triggered record flooding. Officials say it's the small nation's worst ever natural disaster, with floodwaters inundating 2/3 of the country, killing at least 6, with preliminary estimates of more than $500 million in property and infrastructure damage.
When was their best ever natural disaster?
Good point. In South Korea, more than 40,000 Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts are being evacuated from the coastal campsite of the organization's World Jamboree to get them out of the path of a looming typhoon. However, the international conference was already on the verge of being canceled after the most intense heat wave in decades sent nearly 1,500 teenagers to hospitals for heat-related illnesses. In the Midwest U.S., the record heat and high humidity of July, the hottest month in recorded history, has killed hundreds of cattle across Iowa, Kansas, and Nebraska. State officials said the unusual spate of cattle mortality demonstrated the toll of sudden onset extreme heat on farm animals and food production. In the U.S. West, officials say an unusual desert wildfire in California's Mojave National Preserve that exploded in size over the last few weeks is now mostly contained. However, the massive blaze incinerated countless numbers of the preserve's famous slow-growing Joshua trees, which are not adapted to fire. Experts say they are unlikely to regrow, forever altering the state's fragile high desert ecosystem.
On the other hand, we've had a surprisingly easy wildfire season so far this year?
Yes, overall, the U.S. wildfire season in the West has been quieter than usual this year, thanks to a series of winter storms. But Canada's record wildfires continue to rage amid extreme heat and dryness, and have now burned twice as much land and produced twice the carbon emissions of any previous year on record.
That's not good.
Finally, prolonged extreme heat in the southwestern U.S. has killed nearly 150 people in just 5 counties in Arizona, Nevada, and Texas, according to medical examiners. But experts say the actual toll may be much higher. Extreme heat kills more people in the U.S. than all other types of disasters combined. Rebecca Benner of the Nature Conservancy on CBS News warned that the costs of human-caused climate change are already here and rising, but accelerating climate action can reduce its impacts.
It is no longer a future threat. We are living this now. So whether your basement just flooded, whether you just had to evacuate for a fire, whether it's too hot for you to go outside and enjoy yourself, that means we are now experiencing some of the impacts of climate change. We have to reduce emissions, and we have to do it immediately and faster.
She sounds not so happy about that. Can't understand why. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Don't forget, you can download our reports anytime via Pandora, TuneIn, Apple, Google, or Amazon Podcasts. Find, follow, and share us planet-wide on the Facebooks, Mastodons, and site formerly known as Twitter at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Please help Progressive Voices support the Green News Report by stopping by bradblog.com/donate.
Mary had a little lamb.
We believe that all men are created equal.
To the magnificent mosaic that is America.
From radio beacon to radio beacon.
I have a dream today.
Change has come to America.
Believe me.
Help is on the way.
Knock, knock. Who's there?
It's a figment of your imagination.
Randi Rhodes Show. Turn up your mind.
The hundreds of people serving who have been convicted in the January 6th insurrection and the riot have, they've said it was Trump's words that launched them into action. I've said so repeatedly under oath. So if you go after me, I'm coming after you. It's a threat. Out front now, Ty Cobb, former Trump White House lawyer, is here. And look, Ty, at issue here, you've been on the receiving end of some threatening posts from Trump, right? He makes comments and threats against people in words. In June, he said you'll be held legally responsible for what he called false statements. He didn't specify what they were. He hasn't followed through. And in fact, in terms of physically following through, right, that's not something that he's ever done. So now he's posting about his indictments. He's saying, if you go after me, I'm coming after you. So is this just a case of prosecutors really aren't going to be able to do anything about it?
I think the prosecutors, with the assistance of the judge, will be able to tame this somewhat. I'm not sure that Trump's lawyers will be able to get him to adhere to whatever limitations they impose, and as a result, he may be sanctioned and could even be held in contempt and put in jail and have to run for president from jail like Eugene Debs did back in the 30s.
Great. Great. Yeah, Eugene V. Debs, he did run from jail. He was the socialist candidate, and he was like a big organizer and ended up going to jail and, ran from jail, gave some great speeches. If you're in the mood, look them up. They're unbelievably good. They're amazing, actually. He was, a seriously help the middle class kind of a guy, just like Trump, right? No, Donald Trump. Okay, so the issue now that we're waiting to see what the response is should Donald Trump be under a gag order so that he doesn't put in social media posts or say on Fox News or say on Newsmax or any of these crazy, Rumble shows or whatever, doesn't give away witness background, witness testimony, things that were given under seal with the grand jury's secrecy protections in place, right? Do you want to hand that information over to Donald Trump without any regulations, without any rules, saying he can't take this information away from the table with him? He can't have it. It's only being given to him to help him and his attorneys prepare a defense. And so he can only share this material with attorneys, maybe paralegals. Do you know what I'm saying? Like a very small sort of a, limited group of people who get to know what witness testimony in secret grand jury settings actually was, what the transcripts say, what the people did, what they are accusing or alleging, or what they're exculpatory, meaning, evidence that might inure to Donald Trump's benefit, whatever testimony they gave. Or should Donald Trump be able to try this case? Just forget about the sanctity of the courtroom or the ability to seat an unbiased jury or the ability to have a courtroom that the judge controls instead of Donald Trump controls. Should we have some limits? Now, let me just tell you that a lot of people are going to talk about free speech, like his attorney. First of all, the subject of this case, the charges in this case, the charges. We'll talk about the gag order in a minute. Separate that conversation from this one. The charges in this case have absolutely nothing to do with free speech. You understand that, right? You have to sort of start to understand that John Lauro isn't even ready for prime time, but he's all over TV making the case that this indictment has something to do with free speech. It doesn't. It has to do with fraud. It has to do with defrauding us. It has to do with not counting votes properly. We're entitled to not only cast our votes properly, but we're entitled to have them count properly. And when you consider that even one fraudulent vote is so prosecutable in our system of government that one bad vote, one fraudulent vote actually lands you in jail. You saw what happened to those 5, they were African-American ex-felons who believed in Florida that their voting rights were restored. They went and they voted. Ron DeSantis decided to hunt them, 5 people, decided that they were the problem with this election, decided to hunt them, hunted them, arrested them, and prosecuted them. Finally, in the end, the charges were dropped, but put these people through absolute hell. They were all facing another 5 years in prison for fraudulently, even though they didn't know, they thought that their voting rights had been restored. But we have certain people in this state, certain felons, that are never, ever going to be forgiven. They're never going to have their voting rights restored. And also, if your fines aren't completely paid up, then you're not eligible to vote, even though we have no board, no tax assessor, no office in Florida that you can go to and ask them, what are my outstanding court fees? What do I still owe the state? Nobody could tell you that. But we know that one fraudulent vote is prosecuted in this country, 5 years being a minimal sentence for that. But Donald Trump can throw out millions of votes, millions. He's allowed to do that. No, this is a case of fraud. This is a case of conspiracy to commit fraud, meaning he engaged with more than one person. Now, here's the dirty little secret about conspiracy. A conspiracy is completed, not when you're successful. A conspiracy is completed when the 2 or more people involved in the conspiracy agree to enter into it. That's it. There's nothing further that needs to be proven about whether or not it was a conspiracy if you have more than 2 people or more than one person agreeing with another person to commit a conspiracy. And in this case, the conspiracy is to defraud you. Right? So this has nothing to do with free speech. Okay. That said, a gag order has everything to do with free speech. Everything. A gag order is saying that the court is preemptively taking away your ability to say certain things about what you saw because those things you saw are protected under secrecy rules that they were collected under. So the collection of that testimony was protected under secrecy rules, secret grand jury proceedings. And now the question is whether or not we give Donald Trump the ability to pierce that secrecy for his benefit and his benefit alone, and post the names of witnesses or post, digital, evidence, like Mark Meadows' phone records or text messages or whatever Donald Trump has now access to without any rules of the road. And so the reason why this is a hard call, and it is, and it should be, and the reason why John Lauro is emphasizing free speech over and over and over in inappropriate context so far, because the indictment has nothing to do with free speech. In fact, the indictment itself says Donald Trump is free to speak and free to lie and free to say that he lost or won an election that he won or lost. He's free to turn truth on its head. He's free to do whatever he wants about that. What he's not free to do is enter into a conspiracy to commit crimes, to defraud people from their vote counting properly. And we all know that one person does that, and we know what the penalty is. But here he was doing it on a humongous scale with the help of others. So a conspiracy to defraud. But the gag order question, okay, so while we go to the break, let me leave you with this thought. You can mull it over and then tell me what you think should happen. Donald Trump is king of the NDAs. What? Yes, Donald Trump is the king of the non-disclosure agreement, meaning Donald Trump, you work for him, you sign away your free speech rights, right? Can't talk about him.
Clear for takeoff. Randi Rhodes. RandiRhodes.com.
The Bob Cesca Show.
Bob Cesca. Two of Donald Trump's political allies in Michigan have been charged with felonies in connection with the alleged voting machine tampering.
I thought that was here in Georgia. So I guess that case is proceeding too. But like, there's another instance where they went into a polling place here in Georgia.
Oh, yeah. And you know, I think Rudy is somehow connected to that, isn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was one of him and Sidney Powell's things.
Exactly. All right, so this is a separate case. So this is more Republican election fraud, right? Jesus, these people.
I asked my ninth grade English teacher, a wonderful, very Southern, very gay man, very Jewish. Because I was like, what is chutzpah? And he was like,
chutzpah,
David,
right?
He said, chutzpah is murdering your parents and then asking the judge for leniency because you're an orphan.
An orphan. Yep, that is chutzpah.
And that's just this whole thing with Trump. It's like, you can't this is election interference. You're persecuting me because I'm running for president. It's like, no, you ran for president ahead of the U.S. Marshals knocking down your door and arresting you.
That's his election, his campaign is getting in the way of indictments.
That's what I think. Again, it's amazing. I wrote a whole piece for The Banter this week, just laying out all the awful things from Donald Trump. What more people need to do in the mainstream press, including cable news, is to emphasize that the reason Donald Trump is using that defense is because he intentionally ran for president again, or started his campaign again, because he knew that he was in legal jeopardy.
This charges were about to drop.
Yeah, this is entirely about manufacturing an insurance policy for himself.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to run, and I may not win, but if I do, I'm going to be able to wiggle out of at least these federal charges.
Bob Cesca.
It's the Bob Cesca Show. New episodes every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, everywhere you get your podcasts, and at bobcescashow.com.
How about a little bit of good news for a change? Specifically, good news about news. The demise of local newspapers has been a very depressing story in the last few years, with several thousand of them gobbled up by Wall Street profiteers. Those money powers loot the publication's assets, then callously shut down each community's paper or reduces them to empty news shells. So that's that. Local print journalism is passé, right? Wrong. High-spirited, community-minded subscribers in places like Glen Rose, Texas, Hamburg, Iowa, Portland, Maine, and International Falls, Minnesota, are humming an upbeat tune of regeneration that could be titled, Not Dead Yet. In Maine, for example, 5 of the state's 6 daily papers and 17 weeklies were sinking under the ownership of an investment group, but all were recently bought by the National Trust for Local News, a nonprofit started 2 years ago. The trust is turning each publication over to local nonprofit owners and helping them find ways to become sustainable. Another new effort called Cherry Road Media has bought 77 rural papers in 17 states, most from the predatory Gannett conglomerate that wanted to dump them. Cherry Road's business plan is simple, old-time genius. Return editorial decision-making to local people and journalists who know the town. Be an active presence and participant in community affairs. Make the locals responsible for sustaining their town's paper and, most important, reinvest profits in real local journalism that advances democracy. This is Jim Hightower saying, in both of these new initiatives, the foremost mission is to serve the common good of the communities, not to pad the wealth of a few distant financiers. To learn more about these models and how you might implement something similar in your town, contact Institute for Rural Journalism, ruraljournalism.org. The Hightower Radio Lowdown is made possible by you subscribers.
I watched it on TV.
All things Randy at RandyRhodes.com.
Go for launch.
Speaking truth to power, the Randi Rhodes Show.
This weekend, the judge rejected your request for 3 more days to consider the special counsel's proposed rules for how to handle evidence. The proposed protective order that would let Trump use some sensitive information but not take that information with him. Will you agree to that?
Well, first of all, this protective order that's being suggested by the Biden administration is an effort to keep from the press important non-sensitive information that the Biden administration has that may speak to
This isn't by the Biden administration. This is by the
President
special
Trump.
independent counsel.
No, here for this reason, no. The independent counsel, it's not independent, it's special counsel, has to get the approval of Merrick Garland in order to go forward.
No.
Joe Biden said in November 2022 that he wanted to see President Trump prosecuted and taken out of this race.
There's
So it
no,
is the Biden
I'm just going to stop you because there's no
about it.
evidence
But the
that
bottom line is
Joe Biden is involved in this. And you're right, it's a special counsel. Let's just stick to the question. Do you believe that this is something that you'll agree to?
The point is that we will not agree to keeping information that's not sensitive from the press. The press and the American people in a campaign season have a right to know what the evidence is in this case, provided that this evidence is not protected otherwise. So we're going to oppose it, as we have. But for whatever reason, these lawyers on the prosecution team want to keep that from the press.
Well, won't the evidence come out in trial anyway?
Right. That the press... some of it will, not all of it. I'm shocked that the press isn't lined up objecting to this protective order, because not only is President Trump being attacked for his First Amendment rights, now these prosecutors are trying to impinge on the freedom of the press.
Okay, let's stick to. I
so
appreciate you trying to stick up
what's
for
happening. I'm telling you.
I appreciate you trying to stick up for us, but let's talk about the actual
I'm telling you what's going on
substance
right now.
of what they were trying to do in the filing.
This man only wants to argue freedom of the press. He only wants to argue the First Amendment of the United States Constitution. But I'm sorry, his client isn't being charged with a violation of the First Amendment. He's not the press, and he's not been charged with any press violations, okay? The man is being charged with fraud, a conspiracy to defraud the United States, a conspiracy to stop an official proceeding in Congress from occurring so that he could remain in power. And he thought for at least 10 days, right? Incrementally, he would stay in power, right? That's what he's being charged with. But I couldn't figure out for the life of me why John Lauro was, saying that Donald Trump was being charged with First Amendment stuff until now. And that's why I went back and re-listened to this interview because Dana Bash was very forceful. I mean, he did the full Ginsburg. He was on all 5 Sunday shows this weekend, something that we don't see very often. And he was doing it to spread this First Amendment thing around every single audience that he could reach. And obviously, it's because Donald Trump wants to try this, A, in the media, and B, he needs access to all of this secret grand jury material in order to try it in the press, in order to try it on social media, in order to keep posting. Now, the threatening thing that he posted, okay, the thing where he said, if you come after me, I'll come after you. The only reason why that was included in the request for a protective order over the secret grand jury information isn't because they were trying to litigate whether or not that was a threat. They weren't fighting a First Amendment issue when they included that in their pleading to the judge. They were trying to show the judge this is where he will fight it out. This is what he will do with secret grand jury information. This is what he will do with the names of witnesses who are testifying against him. This is what he will do if he finds out Mark Meadows is a cooperating witness against him. This is what he will do to Mike Pence. This is what he will do to anybody that steps. If Rudy Giuliani's cut a deal, this is what he will do to Rudy Giuliani. Okay, and he will fight it out in the media. And so for the protection of these witnesses, so that they make it to trial, we're asking you to put a protective order on the secret grand jury information. That's what this is about. Here, I'll play you a judge. This is Judge, she's a retired judge. Her name is Judge Cordell. She served in California, and she was asked about why the threat was included. Okay, and this was a real nice, simple explanation.
So I don't know necessarily that quote impacts the protective order, but that certainly would get me thinking, if I were the trial judge, about a gag order in this case. It's clearly a threat. And a good trial judge doesn't just look at the law. You use common sense. And anyone looking at common sense, looking at what he has posted and the timing of when he posted it, raises another issue, whether or not this person and the team should be told, and this is true on both sides, just to say we're going to have a mutual gag order. And I would expect that may come next. And I'm afraid that what after that, if indeed the gag order is issued, which is not a First Amendment issue at all, it's basically saying don't talk about this outside of the courtroom. My guess is Trump would violate it in a heartbeat, and then we'll see what the judge does in terms of consequences for violating yet another court order.
So you think there will be a gag order here? At least you think that there should be?
Oh, I absolutely can see it coming because this man cannot shut up. You know, he's a chatty Charlie. And he's going to just talk and talk, and he really doesn't care about rules and about saying the rules that say you can speak or cannot speak. So this is where the test of a good trial judge comes about. If you're going to have a fair trial, it's going to be by the rules set by that person in a black robe. And if the rules are you do not talk about this other than in the court because it's not punishment, it's to ensure a fair trial.
Right.
If that doesn't happen, there has to be immediate consequence to violating a court order. Only in that way can everyone have respect for the system.
So that is the lay of the land. I mean, those are the facts about a judge and the judge's discretion and the judge's obligation to ensure the integrity of the proceedings, to protect the witnesses, to protect the process itself. And especially in high publicity, high visibility cases, a gag order becomes a question for the court. Now, the idea of Trump being, Trump being put under a gag order is not a shocking request. It's not a shocking ask. What would be shocking is what happens when he violates it. And he will, because he has no respect for law and order or judges or proceedings or witnesses' safety or the integrity of a trial. He has no care for any of these things at all, which is kind of why, you know, a guy like that who doesn't give an F about the safety and security of the witnesses, whether they're there to exculpate him or inculpate him or whatever they're there to do. He doesn't care who lives or dies, just himself, right? But the order obviously would be issued, and it would prohibit him and also the Jack Smith. It would prohibit the prosecution too, their attorneys, all the witnesses, the entire media, and that's why he's saying, I would think the free press, from talking about the case outside the courtroom. But that might actually get us to want a speedy trial more than we already do with cameras in the courtroom. Because in trial, he will learn everything.
Clear for takeoff. Randi Rhodes. RandiRhodes.com.
This is Stephanie Miller, and here's what you missed. We just shared some breaking news with you. Not exactly sure what all this means, other than I think Aileen Cannon is the Trump-appointed unqualified hack that we thought she was. So Hugo Lowell said new on Trump classified docs. U.S. Judge Aileen Cannon appears to disclose that the special counsel is using an out-of-district grand jury to continue to investigate. Can you explain all this to us?
Yeah. So the universe of the information I have is what you just read, Steph,
Right.
but I definitely have a couple of reactions. First of all, when federal prosecutors use a grand jury, they are extraordinarily careful to make sure they have the lawful authority to use that grand jury. Let me give you a quick example, an easy example. If you're investigating a bank robbery in a grand jury, you've investigated the case, you've presented all the witnesses and the evidence, and you've had the grand jury return an indictment. One bank robber, no co-conspirators. You can no longer investigate the case in the grand jury.
Okay.
You can't use the grand jury to help you develop evidence for trial if you've already indicted all the known charges. But there are often lots of other charges and lots of potential co-conspirators that you can continue to investigate, both in the jurisdiction where it happened, and if there happened to be any criminal conduct in other jurisdictions, you can use those other grand juries. My money's on Jack Smith doing this, right? And the beauty of this is Judge Cannon may have exposed herself, we don't know yet, but may have exposed herself for the advocate for Donald Trump that she is. If it forces an appeal because she's wrong and she's again abusing her discretion as a judge, this may be the perfect vehicle to move to have her recuse herself.
Hear all this and more on the next Stephanie Miller Show.
This is what they are. This is all they have to offer. This is Trump's Republican Party. Lawless, chaotic, violent, cruel, small, and mean. In 2024, it's a choice between liberty and oppression, between your rights and their control, between education and book burning, between truth and sick propaganda, between pride and strength in the world or bowing down to dictators. The only thing Donald Trump and his imitators offer America is a country worse off than today. A country where poverty, violence, ignorance, and cruelty define their American nightmare. Fighting them will take courage, strength, determination. Are you in?
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1902. That was the day more than 100 trade union delegates representing thousands of working people in St. Paul, Minnesota, elected Charles James to be the president of the city's Trades and Labor Assembly. Virtually forgotten by history, James is considered to be the first African-American elected to a city labor council anywhere in America. He was born in 1866 in St. Paul and began working as a leather cutter for local shoe manufacturers at age 15. This was at a time when most African Americans were excluded from skilled trades. His biographer Dave Riley asserts that it is unclear when James became involved in union politics and organizing. Shoemaking was the largest.
Don't give up. Don't give up. What's true?
Call in, connect. To speak to Randy, call 561-270-3844. 561-270-3844.
So I've been in his position before where he represented a very difficult client under, great pressure, who's, concerned about the possibility of going to jail. I think one of the dangers, and John is respected and he has a good reputation and he certainly knows his way around the courtroom. Former federal prosecutor, briefly. But think about it. I mean, he's been in this case for less than 3 weeks.
Yeah.
There's no way he could have mastered the nuances of the record. They've got a lot of talking points to work from, but most of those talking points are false, just like the big lie is false. And so John's stuck getting out there, trying to go toe to toe with Dana and other professionals who've lived this stuff for 2 years, and that's difficult. That's hard to do. And that he also admitted a couple of things that I think will come back to haunt them in terms of requests of Pence and acknowledgement that they did want to delay the vote. So I think it's dangerous to be out there. Trump has needed somebody in charge. John seems to be taking charge, but he also needs somebody who can, effectively communicate with the media with a finely honed message. And this message is a little awkward so far.
Yeah, the reason why this message is so awkward so far is because Donald Trump, A, has not been charged with any First Amendment violations. But now you can see why Laura wanted to go down the First Amendment road. He knows that Donald Trump is telling him, Donald Trump is commanding him not to be the best lawyer he can be, Donald Trump is commanding John Lauro to say his First Amendment rights have been violated so that there will be no gag order, and Donald Trump can be his own lawyer on social media. Donald Trump can be his own lawyer through witness intimidation, through, scaring people, through mafia tactics, okay? I tell a guy to push a button, he pushes a button. This is the way Donald Trump is, and he needs the info on the witnesses so he could put their lives in danger, right? Think about what happened to Nancy Pelosi's husband. Why did that happen to Nancy Pelosi's husband? Okay, think about what happened to Comet Ping Pong and Pizza. Why did that happen at Comet Ping Pong and Pizza? Right, because they spread conspiracy theories. And Donald Trump wants to do that with the witness testimony. He wants to try it himself. He thinks he's a better lawyer than John Lauro. He just needs somebody that's, looks good on TV and can say what Donald Trump tells him to say. And now that the gag order issue, which is a First Amendment consideration, this is what happens in our constitutional system. You have two inalienable rights, two vital constitutional principles going head to head, knocking each other in the head, right? And one is the Sixth Amendment, the right to a public trial, right? A fair public trial. And the other one is the free speech, the First Amendment. So you have these two amendments that stand in conflict with each other. And a judge has a lot of discretion in cases like that. The judge is going to decide whether or not there can be. Here's the test. You want the test? It's always a three-part test. Just saying. This is why the law is so, it takes 3 years to learn it. Okay, this is why. There's always a three-part test over here. And it's always a test to decide which of the constitutional rights, not as more powerful than the other, not as more important than they're all vital. But which one prevails in this scenario? Now, if you don't like the result, of course, that's what appeals are for. Okay, that's it. Here's the test. 1, there's a clear threat to the fairness of the trial. I would say yes. 2, such a threat is posed by the actual publicity that you're trying to restrain, meaning keeping Donald Trump from posting witness names on Truth Social so that they could do what they did to Mr. Pelosi. I would say yes. And the third part of the test, no less restrictive alternatives are available. See, I don't know about that one. I don't know. I mean, but we are talking about Donald Trump. So, all right, I'll just throw in with that one. But you see what I'm saying? This takes some thought. It's called prior restraint, and it's a very important decision that needs to be made, and almost immediately, so that Jack Smith. The whole purpose of this is so that Jack Smith can share all of the evidence that he has. This is what he wants to do. This is what he's required to do, but he wants to do it now. He's ready to share all the evidence he has with John Lauro, with Donald Trump's defense attorneys or attorney. That is what this is all about. So the question for you, if you were the judge, is going to be, will he leak it? If he does, will it impede the ability for me to have a fair trial in my courtroom? The publicity about these people, if I give it to him, am I trying to restrain that kind of, yes, I am. But the third one is the hard one. Is there any other alternative? And here's why I want you to consider this. It's because if Donald Trump is granted, every available sentence, every available graph, every available photo, every available text message, every available phone record, in this case, if they make it totally available to him and he doesn't have to see it in like a lawyer's office, but he could take it with him. He could sit there on his toilet and he could tweet it to the world or social, whatever he calls that post thing, right? And he's under a gag order not to. You're going to have to put him in jail. You're going to have to at least sanction him some, like a couple of times in the court, like make it cost him money, stuff like that. And then it's going to come down to he's just going to defy you because that's what he is. He's a 6-year-old boy. It's all he is. He's a 6-year-old boy that only cares about himself. You tell him not to touch a hot stove, he's going to keep touching the hot stove. And if he burns himself, he's going to blame you and he's going to kick you for making him feel the burn. Right? It's who he is. It's what he does. And he's a bully on top of it. And if you give him this information, he will bully every single solitary witness against him to the point where they will not want to testify. They will, some of them are doing it under deals that they've made so that they don't get prosecuted. They'll say, it's better I go to jail. It's better I do. See what I mean? And so what is the punishment going to be when he violates? And that's why John Lauro is so busy being on TV telling you they're taking away his First Amendment rights. They're taking away his First Amendment. Because a gag order literally would. Literally would. But this case is not about the First Amendment at all. This case is about your right to vote and have your votes fairly counted. This case is about a conspiracy, not only to defraud the United States, but to stop an official proceeding of Congress, which we all learned the hard way. It's got a 20-year penalty. Nothing free speech was charged, not even incitement. Jack Smith didn't even go down that road of whether or not Donald Trump at the Ellipse that day or in his tweet, come January 6th, it'll be wild. Didn't even go there. And gave him a pass on the lying. Told him, you're free to lie. You can, as the president, and I disagree with this, but as the president of the United States, you can say you won when you lost.
Randi Rhodes. RandiRhodes.com.
Hi, Dad. Thank you. You've always taken on the hard jobs and never complained. You didn't sign up for half the things you did. You just did it. For me. You protected me, taught me, and guided me. I haven't said this since I was little, but I'm scared, Dad. I'm scared to send the kids off to school or to go to church. Your granddaughter is scared that her teacher's going to be fired for reading her the wrong book. And I'm scared that my health is going to be decided by a room full of men that you and I have never met. You've always been there for me, Dad, even when we disagree. And so I'm asking you to do the hard thing one more time. This election, will you vote to protect me? To protect my daughter? And every daughter.
As kids, we learn that bullies can't help it. They pick on anyone they think is smaller, weaker. They pick on people they think won't fight back.
So you're going to give a speech or you're going to ask a question?
And like all bullies,
I'd like to punch him in the face, I'll tell you.
they keep going.
Why don't you go yourself, you tiny brain, and I hope this gets picked up.
Until they get punched in the face.
I still got hope because I know we are still here and we will never quit.
Until they see someone standing up.
This is the voice of the people.
Not breaking.
If the governor thinks he can do a better job, then he should run for state attorney, not president.
Not bending.
That's my question to you, Governor. You're the governor of the state. I'm not the governor of the state.
Not giving in.
Do you think that your tweets and your name calling are turning people off?
Because when bullies get their way, they never stop.
Except it is like highly confidential, secret. This is secret information. But look at this.
There was nothing to declassify. These were newspaper stories, magazine stories, and articles.
I'm just saying, he wanted to attack Iran and what? These are the papers. This was done by the military, given to me.
There was no document. That was a massive amount of papers and everything else talking about Iran and other things. And it may have been held up or may not, but that was not a document. I didn't have a document per se.
Trying to
Declassified.
figure out yeah.
See, as president, I could have declassified
Yeah.
it. Now I can't, but this is
Yeah,
classified.
now we have a problem.
Isn't that interesting?
So when you send it, it's declassified. I declassified everything. All I know is this, everything I did was right.
excited to see members of Congress incite violence against law enforcement, enjoy armed insurrections, and the big lie? If so, thank a MAGA Republican. If you think election results should only count when Republicans win, thank a MAGA Republican today. The Lincoln Project is responsible for the content of this advertising.
Whether you're listening to Leslie Marshall each Tuesday through Friday or Brad Bannon each Monday, you can hear them from 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern on the Progressive Voices Network. Here's a sample of what you'll hear.
Scott Paul in the House. He's president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing.
You know, first of all, I do want to say that I don't believe a military conflict with China is desirable or inevitable. I think we ought to do everything we possibly can to avoid that. At the same time, I think we need to be realistic about what the intentions of the Chinese government are, particularly with respect to some strategic competition, and they're not necessarily friendly to our interests there. And so it strikes me as odd that we would have a trade policy that treats the People's Republic of China the same way as it treats a country like the Netherlands or the United Kingdom or anybody else. It just, that doesn't make sense to me. And so, but that's what China has right now. It has something called permanent normal trade relations. It's not quite a free trade agreement, but the tariffs are super, super low, except for on some other goods that they've been punished for. And so it just seems that we're at a moment where it makes sense to for Congress to have more control over.
Oh, wow.
Fatality. This is the Randi Rhodes Show. To speak with Randi, dial 561-270-3844. That's 561-270-3844.
The former president's lawyer, a new lawyer, John Lauro, is defending the president's actions, obviously. He says a technical violation of the Constitution is not a violation of criminal law. Does that make sense to you?
No. And he admits that the president violated his oath. Think about that. The president of the United States promises to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. His own lawyer has admitted he violated the Constitution.
I want to play something he told Laura Ingraham on Fox last week.
What President Trump said is, let's go with option D. Let's just halt. Let's just pause the voting and allow the state legislatures to take one last look and make a determination as to whether or not the elections were handled fairly. That's constitutional law. That's not an issue of criminal activity.
Did he admit the president committed a crime? I mean, because the president is charged with corrupt obstruction of an official proceeding.
Right. He did. And let me say what else he did. You know, he's opposite of what the evidence is. Mike Pence has been very clear about this. He said the president didn't ask him to halt or pause. He said that he was asked by the president to reverse it.
Throw him away.
To reverse the result.
Right.
And that's what Mike Pence is going to testify to. I suspect that's what he's already testified to in the grand jury. We don't know for sure because those matters are secret.
Right.
But I suspect he hasn't said anything different to the grand jury.
Do you think Mark Meadows is going to testify?
Oh, I've said all along, I think Mark Meadows is already a cooperating witness. He has all the looks of a cooperating witness, running into coffee shops away from the press.
And he's disappeared in the indictment. I mean, he's referenced once or twice.
Right.
But
So when you didn't see Mark Meadows as an unindicted co-conspirator, and you see absolutely no mention of him at all.
How devastating do you think his testimony could be?
It could be the worst testimony for him outside of the family members.
Oh.
Because Mark Meadows was with him constantly during that
And
period of
involved in
time.
all of it, in Georgia, in the electors.
He was a very involved chief of staff in my experience. He made sure he was in every meeting and every conversation. So, and we remember there are hundreds of text messages that he turned over to the special counsel that he kept.
Right. Because Mark Meadows started cooperating and then he withdrew his cooperation because he was intimidated or threatened or extorted by Donald Trump, who apparently would like the information that Mark Meadows turned over in the secret grand jury proceedings. And we know Mark Meadows had to turn over secret grand jury information because he's not an unindicted co-conspirator. In fact, you know what's very important about this indictment? It's not just the 6 names that we all, went to great lengths to, identify for ourselves and for, if you have an audience or if you're, a person on social media and you're, trying to solve the riddle of the mystery of the indictment and who these unindicted co-conspirators are. You spent a little time, knowing, okay, 1 is Giuliani and 2 is Eastman and 3 is Clark and 4 is, Cheeseborough and 5 is, but what's more important is who's not an unindicted co-conspirator. Mark Meadows is not.
Meadows is a rat. This guy's a rat.
Yeah, well, that means Ivanka's a rat too. That means Jared Kushner's a rat too.
How fun was that just to hear him say that? Could be the most damning witness outside the family.
The family.
The family.
And Jared was like sitting on Donald Trump's lap through the entire Donald Trump administration. Jared used that administration to inure a $2 billion payday to himself by taking our secrets and selling them to the guy who wants to be the next king of Saudi Arabia. I mean, walked away with $2 billion, and Donald Trump got himself a golf tournament, right, to come through his golf clubs. But Jared's not mentioned. And he testified before the grand jury. Ivanka's not an unindicted co-conspirator, and she testified. We know she did. Also, what's her name? Cassidy Hutchinson, right? Her testimony had to be devastating because we saw what she testified to in front of the January 6th committee. So all these people that are not named, those are the people that the court is also trying to protect, right? To make sure they make it to trial alive. So that's all real interesting, too. And then one last thing that Christy pointed out that I just loved. You want to hear something that's going to make you feel all fuzzy and warm inside? It's going to make you feel really, really good? Check out this little clip, okay?
By the way, when you're a criminal defendant out on bail, and let's focus on that. He is now out on bail in 3 different jurisdictions, New York, Florida, and Washington, D.C. We have a front runner in this race who's out on bail in 3 jurisdictions.
That's pretty incredible.
And when what happens though when you're let out is that there are restrictions placed on you for you to stay out. And one of the restrictions that was placed on him was no contact or intimidation of potential witnesses.
He's saying, if you go after me, I'm coming after you. His lawyers are now saying that post was generalized political speech, not directed at anyone.
Well, of course that's what they're going to say, because what they really feel like saying is, oh my God, I can't believe he did that again.
I love that guy. I could listen to that clip and it could just, soothe me into a deep, deep, lovely, melatonin-induced kind of a sleep. Like a really good one, like when you take 10 milligrams of the time-release melatonin. Oh, Natrol, the best. And I don't get any money from them for doing that. But I'm just saying, just listening to that clip, that it has the same warm, delicious effect on me when I hear him say that. Now, the Trump spoke, John Laura said, that's just political speech to threaten judges. If you come after me, I will come after you. And he's saying, well, that's just the definition of political free speech, which is just, it's true, but it's a commentary on just how disgusting our politicians and their speech has become, where they get to it's political free speech, the likes of what you would have heard at a Nuremberg rally, okay? It's right up there. It's just nothing but threats is all it is. But that's how low we've gotten. It's like we have devolved instead of evolved into a more modern, efficient, freer, better, easier, breezier country. We have become this disgusting, political speech under Trump is like it's like attending a freaking Nuremberg rally. I mean, I don't even know what else to say. It's like being at one of Mussolini's events. It's just so bad, and it's so ugly, and it's made to induce fear and deep, negative emotions in people is what it's designed to do, and it does, because we're human. We're human. And this is all for the MAGA base, okay? That's all this hatred is all to feed them, to inflame them, and to make them willing to hurt the witnesses. See what I mean? But I love the way Christie said, let's just remember he's out on bail. He's out on bail in 3 different jurisdictions. And when you're out on bail, restrictions are placed upon ye. And if you don't adhere to them, you lose the ability to move freely about the country.
That you think that's what they said privately to each other?
Their lawyers are like want to jump out the window having to defend some of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And here's the bottom line on it is that let's put aside if it's legal or illegal for a second.
Okay.
Is this the kind of conduct that the Republican Party or the American people want from someone who's going to be president? To send out tweets or posts, whatever they are, that he sends on True Social, saying this kind of stuff, threatening people, trying to intimidate Mike Pence, trying to intimidate the judge. Mike Pence, as we know, he just falls in the line of Rex Tillerson and Jeff Sessions and Bill Barr and all these folks who were the best people ever when he hired them. Right. And then as soon as they say something that
and extraordinarily loyal also to him.
Yes. And as soon as they disagree with him, then they become the worst people on earth. The things he wrote about Mike Pence. Look, I'm running against Mike. I want to make sure I beat him and I become the Republican nominee. But he doesn't deserve that.
No, nobody does. Nobody deserves to be targeted for death or hanging or oh, Nancy, or to have your husband attacked in the middle of the night at 80 years old. Nobody deserves that kind of retribution because of political speechifying. No, and this is not what America needs. Or, listen, there's a tiny little sliver. But that's the sad truth, that it only takes one. It only takes one idiot, one lone wolf, one guy from North Carolina to shoot up the ping pong parlor. It only takes one lunatic, fringy guy to go into the clock tower. It only takes one idiot to go, knock on Nancy Pelosi's door at 3 o'clock in the morning. And then the freaking right-wing media defends the attacker. Oh, he was, he was the lover of Nancy Pelosi's husband. I mean, this is so sick and so bad and so twisted. And it's making us less free and less modern and less good and less, less of a shining city on the hill. To use another political cliche.
Clear for takeoff. Randi Rhodes. RandiRhodes.com.
Now, the top of the hour on the Progressive Voices channel on TuneIn presents the Green News Report.
Nobody is acclimated to 115, 118 degrees.
The deadly toll of extreme heat rises in Arizona.
Juneau now under a state of emergency. 2 structures have collapsed into the river so far, with more at risk, including a condo building, as officials call the riverbank highly unstable.
Glacial outburst flooding a growing danger in Alaska. Plus,
Slovenia's prime minister says this is the worst natural disaster in the nation's history.
Extreme rains and deadly floods strike Central Europe, pummeling Slovenia.
All of that pummeling and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
You know you're living in a hot place when you have to keep oven mitts in your glove compartment.
Yeah, probably not in the glove compartment because you can't touch the metal tab.
Welcome to Phoenix. This is your Green News Report. All right, Desi Doyen, big news, I think good news, in Arizona around the Grand Canyon.
Yes, as we go to air, President Biden is set to designate a new federal monument protecting the lands around the Grand Canyon in Arizona from new uranium mining that threatens aquifers and water supplies. In other news, a state of emergency in Alaska's state capital of Juneau hit by record flooding caused by a massive release of water from a lake dammed by a melting glacier. The glacial outburst flood so far has swept away buildings and forced evacuations along the Mendenhall River. Alaska is warming more than twice as fast as the rest of the U.S. Glacial outbursts in this area only began in 2011, and this year's flood hit a new record. A recent study found a rising risk of glacial outburst floods for 15 million people around the globe, more than half of them in India, Pakistan, Peru, and China.
And now Alaska.
The cost of climate change is hitting hard in Slovenia, where they're just beginning to assess the human and economic costs from days of relentless, intense storms that hit Central Europe and triggered record flooding. Officials say it's the small nation's worst ever natural disaster, with floodwaters inundating 2/3 of the country, killing at least 6, with preliminary estimates of more than $500 million in property and infrastructure damage.
When was their best ever natural